Operating as the Bruno crime family under the 21-year reign of boss Angelo Bruno from 1959 to 1980, the family enjoyed an era of peace and prosperity. A complex dispute involving disgruntled subordinates and territory claims by New York's Genovese crime family led to Bruno's murder in 1980. The killing marked the beginning of years of internal violence for control of the Philadelphia family, leading to a gradual decline in the family's stability. Bruno was succeeded as boss by his loyal friend Philip the Chicken Man Testa. However, within a year of Bruno's murder, Testa was also murdered, killed in a nail bomb explosion in 1981. When the dust settled from Bruno and Testa's deaths, Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo, emerged as boss of the crime family. During Scarfo's reign, the family was known as the Scarfo crime family. Scarfo's 10-year reign saw the family grow in power, but also become highly dysfunctional. Unlike Bruno, Scarfo was infamous for his short temper and penchant for violence. He increasingly involved the family in narcotics trafficking and demanded that all criminals pay a street tax for operating in his territory. He also did not hesitate to order people murdered over moderate disputes. The dramatic rise in violence attracted increased attention from the FBI, Pennsylvania State Police, and New Jersey State Police. Increased violence and law enforcement prosecutions also convinced several mobsters to cooperate with the government in order to escape death or prison. Scarfo's downfall came in 1988, when he and most of his top allies were arrested and sentenced to long prison terms. With Scarfo's imprisonment, the mafia hierarchy was convinced that Scarfo was unfit for the position of boss. Once Scarfo was deposed due to rising tensions within the family, John Stanfa was named boss of the Philadelphia family in 1991. A faction of young mobsters led by Joey Merlino disputed Stanfa's ascension, however, launching another war in the family by 1992. The war ended in 1994, when Stanfa and most of his supporters were arrested by the FBI, though less intensified fighting continued until 1996 and began to involve violence from outside the family until the early 2000s. Merlino subsequently took control of the family and allegedly ran the family to varying degrees for the following 2 decades. The Philadelphia family has been weakened over the past 30 years due to internal violence, government turncoats, and law enforcement action following the passage of the RICO Act. Despite this, the family still remains one of the most active and powerful mafia groups in the United States. In the early 20th century, several Italian immigrant and Italian-American street gangs in South Philadelphia formed what eventually became the Philadelphia crime family. Salvatore Sabella was the first leader of the crew that would later bear his name. They busied themselves with bootlegging, extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling, and it was during the Prohibition era that Sabella and his crew were recognized as members of the wider Sicilian crime syndicate of New York City and Chicago. Sabella was born in Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily on July 7, 1891, and became a butcher's apprentice as a young boy. In 1905, tired of dealing with the butcher's violent outbursts, 14-year-old Sabella murdered him. He was convicted of the butcher's murder and sent to prison in Milan, Italy for 3 years. At some point, either in prison or after his release, he became involved with the Sicilian mafia. After his release, he left Italy for the United States, apparently as an illegal immigrant. In 1912, he arrived in Brooklyn, New York, and joined the Salvatore di Aquila criminal organization, which consisted of many other Castellammarese immigrants. During the next few years, mobster Giuseppe trained Sabella for a future role in the organization. In 1919, Salvatore Sabella was sent to Philadelphia to build a Castellammarese Sicilian criminal organization. As a front, he started an olive oil and cheese business and a soft drink cafe. However, his real occupation was to build the family and protect its operations from other criminals. He would train future mob bosses John Avena and Angelo Bruno to run the family. In 1925, Sabella was a suspect in the murder of rival mobster Leo Lanzetti. Leo formed the Lanzetta gang with Ignatius, Pius, and their other brothers in the early 1920s. Leo, Ignatius, Pius, and their other brothers ran the gang. The brothers controlled bootlegging in Little Italy. They were allied with Italian gangsters Michael Falcone and Louis Fats Del Rossi, and their rivals included Polish mob boss William Michael Cusick, Sicilian mafia and Bruno crime family boss Salvatore Sabella, Jewish mob boss Max Boo Boo Hoff, and Italian mafia made man and rival dope peddler and bootlegger Joseph Bruno. The Lanzetta brothers ran their gang with extreme violence and expanded into drug trafficking and numbers writing. On May 30th, 1927, two rebellious members of the Philadelphia organization, Vincent Cocoza and Joseph Zangi, were shot and killed on a Philadelphia street corner. Zangi's brother Anthony provided police with sufficient evidence to indict Sabella for their murders. Sabella was acquitted, but the authorities discovered that he was an illegal alien. Towards the end of 1927, Sabella was deported to Sicily, and Avena became acting boss. After Sabella's deportation, the Castellamarese War erupted in New York between the Castellamarese faction, led by traditional mob boss Salvatore Maranzano, and rival Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria. The two sides would trade gangland slayings for several years. As a Castellamarese immigrant, Sabella was allied with Maranzano. In 1929, having returned to the United States, Sabella temporarily relocated to New York with 9 gunmen to fight for Maranzano. On April 15, 1931, the war ended with the murder of Masseria. At this time, Sabella returned to Philadelphia and resumed control of his family. In 1931, Sabella was arrested for assault and battery with a motor vehicle. That same year, at age 40, Sabella retired from organized crime and permanently passed control of the family to Avena. The reason for Sabella's retirement is unclear. The recent carnage of the Castellamarese War may have prompted him to get out for his own safety. Joe Dovi became the new boss of the Philadelphia crime family. He had good connections with the Chicago outfit and the 5 families of New York City, and he expanded operations outside of South Philadelphia to the greater Philadelphia area, including Atlantic City, New Jersey, and other parts of South Jersey. Narcotics, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and extortion activities provided the family's income, and connections to the Genovese and Gambino crime families grew throughout the 1930s and early 1940s. On October 22, 1946, Dovi died of natural causes at a New York City hospital, and Giuseppe Joseph Ida was appointed by the commission to run the Philadelphia family and its rackets. Joe Ida ran the family throughout the 1940s and early 1950s. Ida and the Philadelphia organization were heavily influenced by the bosses of the 5 families, especially the Genovese crime family, which sought to control the Philadelphia crime family. Vito Genovese, an underboss at the time, assumed control of what would become the Genovese crime family in 1956 after the shooting of former boss Frank Costello, who subsequently retired. Ida and his underboss Dominic Big Dom Oliveto were among the around 100 mafia members who took part in the legendary Appalachian meeting in 1957, a gathering of almost all the bosses of the American Mafia in November 1957, which took place in the community of Appalachian in the state of New York and was stormed by the local police. A total of 62 people were briefly arrested and identified, including Ida and Oliveto. Oliveto withdrew, and shortly after, Ida was charged with drug trafficking and fled to Italy. During his absence, Oliveto's successor, Antonio Pollina, was appointed acting boss, however, was deposed by the commission in 1959, and Angelo, the gentle Don Bruno, was appointed new boss of the family. His rap sheet dated back to 1927 and included arrests for murder, concealed weapons, untaxed liquor, assault, and battery. His legitimate employment was as a cheese salesman for Maggio Cheese Company. Pollina was one of the top leaders of the mafia group known as the Greaser Gang and controlled a large loan shark operation. Pollina ordered his underboss, Ignazio Denaro, to murder Angelo Bruno, but Denaro instead informed Bruno of Pollina's intentions. Bruno used his connections to the commission to take Pollina's power away from him. The commission authorized Bruno to murder Pollina. Pollina stepped down, and Angelo Bruno replaced him and kept Denaro as his underboss. In spite of the alleged murder plot, Pollina remained in Philadelphia and reportedly felt secure enough to ask Angelo Bruno to name him as his consigliere after the death of Joe Rugnetta in 1977. Bruno is said to have declined his request and placed the man who would arrange his death 3 years later instead, Antonio Caponigro. After Ida retired in 1959 and Pollina was demoted, Angelo Bruno was appointed by the commission to run the Philadelphia family. Bruno, the first boss of Philadelphia with an influential seat on the commission, was born in Sicily and was a close ally of Carlo Gambino, solidifying his position as leader of the Philadelphia mafia. Bruno used his contacts and his own business mind to maintain respect and power among other mafia bosses in the country. He expanded the family's profit and operations in Atlantic City, which, due in part to its location within the Philadelphia metro area, had naturally become known as the Philadelphia family's turf. Bruno himself avoided the intense media and law enforcement scrutiny and kept violence down. He spent almost 3 years in prison for refusing to testify at a 1970 hearing on organized crime in the state of New Jersey. After his release, he spent some time in Italy before returning to the United States in 1977. Bruno oversaw the family's gambling syndicate and preferred more traditional operations such as labor racketeering and union infiltration, extortion and protection rackets, loan sharking, numbers games, and other illegal gambling operations, including infiltrating legitimate businesses. Outside of most family issues, however, violence was still the modus operandi of the Philly mafia. By the late 1960s, the Philadelphia crime family used violence and intimidation to control various unions in the food and service industry, such as Local 54 of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union. The crime family plundered the locals' health and welfare funds and used its control to extort money from bars and restaurants. Family members owned or had a controlling interest in many restaurants, bars, and social clubs throughout the Philadelphia, South Jersey area. During the early 1960s, the Philadelphia family was officially recognized as the Bruno family. Bruno had a reputation for seeking peaceful solutions to family issues instead of violence. He was sometimes referred to as the Gentle Don, due to his apparent reluctance to resort to violence or murder if other means of conflict resolution among family members were available, though he had no strong aversion to violence outside of the family. While he preferred negotiation, intimidation, and persuasion or coercion, he generally avoided, if possible, certain violent tactics for pragmatic reasons. Mostly, he believed that excessive violence would bring police attention, disrupt cohesion among his ranks, and jeopardize his illegal businesses and ties with ostensibly legitimate businesses and politicians. Bruno focused mostly on low-risk crimes and gave his subordinates autonomy as long as he received a share of the profits. He prohibited any of his men from getting involved in narcotics trafficking, fearing the long prison sentences that drug trafficking charges could bring. Many of his men disagreed with this decision, seeing the large profits that could be made. Some mobsters like Philip Testa, Antonio Caponigro, Harry Riccobene, and Raymond Martorano ran drug trafficking operations clandestinely without Bruno's knowledge. His men were further angered because Bruno accepted money from John Gambino in order to allow the Gambino crime family to sell heroin on Philadelphia family turf in South Jersey. For decades, the mafia controlled criminal rackets in Philadelphia's African-American neighborhoods, financing black numbers operations and supplying heroin to black drug dealers. In 1970, Samuel Christian and other African-American organized crime figures formed the Black Mafia to take control of illegal activities in the black neighborhoods of Philadelphia from the Mafia, a venture which was partially successful. After the Black Mafia began extorting Mafia operatives in African-American areas, Bruno eventually acquiesced control of some gambling rackets which had historically been dominated by Italian-American mobsters. As per the agreement, black gangsters were required to pay a street tax to the Mafia in order to engage in the rackets. The Black Mafia became defunct as a result of a string of convictions and internal killings during the mid-1970s. Bruno also faced pressure from New York's 5 families to let them have a cut of the business in Atlantic City, a Philadelphia Mafia-controlled city that was at the time transitioning from a city in decline to a gambling den. Following its early 20th century heyday as a respected resort town, Atlantic City had been suffering from a sharp decline in the decades prior to the 1970s. With the introduction of legalized casino gambling in 1977, Atlantic City once again became particularly desired turf for organized crime. However, Atlantic City had long been reckoned as a fief of the Philadelphia family. Under long-standing Mafia rules, the 5 families could only come into Atlantic City with the Philadelphia family's permission, something Bruno was unwilling to give. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino died of a heart attack. With Gambino gone, Bruno lost his most important ally in the underworld. Many of Bruno's subordinates felt that they were missing out on money because of Bruno's old-fashioned and content ways. His consigliere Antonio Caponigro, who hoped to expand the family's drug operations and was heavily involved in the drug trade, largely unbeknownst to and against the wishes of Bruno, approached Genovese family boss Frank Thierry in order to seek the commission's permission to kill Bruno and take over the crime family. Thierry, sensing an opportunity to take Caponigro's North Jersey gambling operation and set up operations in Atlantic City, lied to Caponigro and told him he had the commission's support. On March 21, 1980, Bruno was shot in the back of the head while in his car in South Philadelphia by a gunman working for Caponigro. That April, Caponigro visited New York City under the assumption that he was going to be confirmed as boss. Instead, he was tortured and murdered for killing a commission member without permission. Caponigro's co-conspirators Frank Sindone, Alfred Salerno, and John Simone were also murdered for killing a mob boss without the permission of the commission. Beginning with Bruno's murder in 1980 and the subsequent murder of Caponigro and his co-conspirators, a violent struggle for power erupted within the Philadelphia Mafia. Bruno's successor, his former underboss Philip Testa, lasted just under a year as the boss of the family before he was killed by a nail bomb under his front porch on March 15, 1981. Testa's murder was orchestrated by Frank Narducci in yet another attempt to take control of the family. Peter Casella and Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, the late Testa's underboss and consigliere respectively, were both vying to take over the family. Violence between the two factions ensued. Scarfo was close with Genovese family consigliere Louis Bobby Manna and approached the Genovese hierarchy with his suspicions that Narducci and Casella orchestrated Testa's murder. Bobby Manna was born and raised in Hoboken, New Jersey. He became a close associate of family boss Vincent the Chin Gigante. He rented an apartment in Greenwich Village, New York, to be close to the Chin's headquarters at the Triangle Social Club. However, Manna's power base was in New Jersey. He is the brother-in-law of Genovese crime family mob associate Gerald Durazzo. He supervised 4 captains while also serving as consigliere. He ran his personal criminal operations out of an Italian eatery called Casella's at 6 and 15 First Street in Hoboken, New Jersey. Bobby Manna became the lead man for the Genovese family in discussions with the Gambino crime family on how to equitably divide up that area. In 1987, Manna began pushing the Genovese family to murder John Gotti, the new boss of the Gambino family. As Gambino captain, John Gotti had arranged the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in 1985 and taken control of the Gambino family without the approval of the commission. Manna was especially unhappy about Gotti's unsanctioned coup against Castellano. In addition, he wanted to take the lucrative South Jersey holdings that used to belong to the Philadelphia crime family and leave the less desirable North Jersey territory to the Genovese family. As for the Philadelphia crime family, the Genovese family set up a meeting with Scarfo and Casella, where Casella confessed that Narducci killed Testa so that they could take over the family. Narducci was killed and Casella was banished from the mob and fled to Florida, leaving Scarfo the major candidate for boss of the family. However, the war continued in spite of or because of Scarfo's apparent nomination to boss. Nicodemo Scarfo was a powerful Bruno crime family mobster who operated mostly in Atlantic City, New Jersey prior to his accession to boss. Atlantic City witnessed an economic boom after enacting measures allowing casino gambling in the late 1970s. Scarfo was able to expand his power base by infiltrating the expanding construction and service industries in Atlantic City. Despite Atlantic City being turf of the Philadelphia mafia, Scarfo let the commission and New York families operate in Atlantic City under his discretion in return for their support for him as boss. Scarfo named Salvatore Chucky Merlino as his underboss and Frank Monte as his consigliere. Scarfo demoted Bruno's mob captains and replaced them with Phil Leonetti, Lawrence Yogi Merlino, and Joseph Chicky Ciancaglini Sr., leading to further mafia warring from disgruntled soldiers who were formerly well situated under Bruno and Testa's reign, but passed over by Scarfo, as well as from Philly mafia soldiers in South Jersey, who were angry that Scarfo was allowing New York mafia gangsters to operate in Atlantic City. Scarfo eventually emerged triumphant despite considerable violent opposition and multiple murders. The last person to stand in Scarfo's way was the well-respected longtime Philadelphia crime family mobster and made man, Harry Riccobene. Believing that Scarfo was an unfit and greedy boss, Riccobene refused to pay his tribute to Scarfo. While Angelo Bruno apparently never asked Riccobene for a regular or unreasonable share of his illicit profits, Scarfo demanded a typical kick-up tribute, which angered Riccobene, as he did not view Scarfo as a legitimate or appropriate successor to the position of boss. With Scarfo off the street serving a brief prison term in Texas, the Riccobene War ensued between 1982 and 1984 as part of the larger Second Philadelphia Mafia War in the 1980s. The Scarfo faction was able to kill 3 of Riccobene's men. The Riccobene faction was able to kill Scarfo's consigliere Frank Monte, while Riccobene himself survived 2 attempts on his life. In 1984, the 2 gunmen in the Monte murder, along with Riccobene's brother, were arrested and agreed to cooperate with authorities. They testified at trial that Riccobene ordered Monte's murder. Riccobene was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, ending the war. When Nicodemo Scarfo became boss, he wanted to unify organized crime in the area and dreamed of running a smooth criminal empire. He soon imposed a street tax on all criminal rackets in Philadelphia, South Jersey. Although financially extorting criminals is a common mafia racket, it was a somewhat alien practice in Philadelphia. Enforced by soldiers and associates of the family, the tax was paid by criminals working independently from the mafia, including drug dealers, bookmakers, loan sharks, pimps, and number runners operating in territory that Scarfo deemed his own were forced to pay his street tax weekly. Those who refused to pay the tax were often murdered. Loan shark, drug dealer, and pawn shop owner John Calabrese was killed by Joseph Ciancaglini Sr., Tommy Del Giorno, Frankie Anarella, and Pat Spirito. Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso was brutally beaten by Salvatore Testa and Joey Pungitor for refusing to pay the street tax. He was later murdered in 1985. The crime family's biggest racket was the control of labor unions. During Bruno's and Scarfo's reigns, the Philadelphia crime family maintained some degree of influence over Roofers Union Local 30, Ironworkers Union Local 405, Laborers Union Local 332, and Teamsters Union Locals 107, 158, 331, and 837. The crime family used this influence to extort businesses, steal from the union treasuries, and receive paychecks and benefits for little to no work. Scarfo also got the crime family heavily involved in methamphetamine trafficking, which was the drug of choice in the Philadelphia, South Jersey area. At first, the family extorted money from local meth dealers. When Greek-American gangster Chelseas Bourras, boss of the Philadelphia Greek mob, began intruding on the methamphetamine trade in Philadelphia and refused to pay Scarfo's street tax, Scarfo had him killed. Although the Philadelphia Greek mob had long been a close ally and partner of the Philadelphia mafia, and despite the fact that some Philadelphia Italian crime family members were themselves heavily involved in Boris's methamphetamine trafficking ring, the hot-headed and ruthless Scarfo decided to send a message to all local crime organizations about respecting the street tax and the primacy of the Philadelphia crime family by having Boris killed in public. Boris was eating dinner with his girlfriend, friends, and Scarfo soldier Raymond Martorano when a hit team ambushed and killed Boris and his girlfriend. The Philadelphia crime family then started controlling the meth trade in the area by supplying illicit P2P, the key meth ingredient, to meth manufacturers. By controlling the supply of P2P, the Philadelphia crime family was generally able to control the methamphetamine trade in the Philadelphia, South New Jersey area. Some criminals borrowed money from mafia members to finance meth operations and benefited from working with the mafia instead of being extorted by them. The crime family also had some involvement in cocaine and marijuana trafficking. Scarfo became notorious for his ruthless, paranoid nature. Scarfo demanded complete allegiance to him and ordered people murdered over signs of disrespect, insubordination, or resistance. Described by a former crime family member, if you were in good graces with him, he loves you and you love him. You understand? But you never knew from one day to the next. He'd turn on anybody, and he drew no lines when it came to killing. Most mob bosses were not like him. The mob is basically run the same in every city, but our family was unusual in that it was a very paranoid family because we all feared each other and feared Scarfo the most. He held grudges. If you didn't say hello to him 20 years ago, he never forgot. He used to say, "I'm like the turtle. I get there." You know, we were the best of friends. He believed in me, and I believed in him, but he was very, very paranoid. Soon after his promotion to boss, the number of organized crime-related murders escalated in the 1980s. Philadelphia mobster turned government witness Nicholas Caramandi described Scarfo's violent nature in a 2001 interview. Scarfo was a cowboy. He didn't want a guy taken in a house and shot easily in the back of the head. He wanted it outside in broad daylight, with 1 million people around, restaurants, funeral homes, anywhere. Then it gets written up in the papers, and it puts fear in people. He loved that cowboy stuff. Scarfo had inducted member Pasquale "Pat the Cat" Spirito, murdered in 1983. During the Riccobene War, Pat the Cat switched sides and aligned himself with Scarfo, but was killed for turning down a murder contract on Riccobene's brother. But Scarfo's downfall began when Scarfo loyalist Salvatore Testa was murdered. Despite Testa serving faithfully under Scarfo and committing several murders on his behalf, Scarfo granted his underboss Salvatore Merlino permission to kill Testa for breaking off his engagement with Merlino's daughter. After this, other members and families saw the Philly boss as untrustworthy and paranoid. He also started to earn a negative reputation within his organization, which led to members turning informant in the late 1980s. After Merlino's drinking problem got out of hand, Scarfo demoted him to soldier and promoted his nephew Phil Leonetti as his new underboss. In November 1988, Little Nicky and 16 of his men were convicted of racketeering, 10 murders, 5 attempted murders, extortion, gambling, and narcotics trafficking. Along with Scarfo, underboss Philip Leonetti, 3 of the family's 4 captains and soldiers, such as Albert Pontani, Salvatore Merlino, and others, were arrested. The prosecutions were strengthened by mafia members Tommy Del Giorno and Nicholas Nicky Crow Caramandi, agreeing to cooperate with law enforcement and testify at trial for the government in order to escape long prison terms and Scarfo's ruthless regime. 15 of the defendants received prison sentences ranging from 30 to 55 years, including Nicky Scarfo. Leonetti was the next defector who agreed to cooperate with the FBI after being sentenced to 45 years in prison. Many more mobsters would later be sentenced to long prison terms for crimes such as racketeering, narcotics trafficking, and murder. This caused the number of mafia members in the family to dwindle in the 1990s, with fewer new guys available to replace all those being convicted of serious crimes. By 1990, 21 members were incarcerated, 11 were under indictment, and 6 turned government witnesses. The Pennsylvania Crime Commission reported that there were only 24 members who were free and not facing criminal charges. With many of Scarfo's loyalists serving lengthy prison terms, it became clear that he would not be able to maintain control of the family from prison much longer. To avoid a total power vacuum in the Philadelphia Mafia, John Stanfa, a Sicilian-born mobster with the support and endorsement of the influential Gambino and Genovese crime families in New York, was named boss of the Philadelphia crime family in 1990. Word was sent to the imprisoned Scarfo in October 1990, with Scarfo being informed that he was no longer boss and that John Stanfa had been installed as boss, though Stanfa wasn't officially installed as boss until 1991. The New York Mafia's intrusion in Philadelphia Mafia affairs was not well received by many of the younger Philadelphia-born mobsters in the Philadelphia crime family, including Joseph "Skinny Joey" Merlino, the son of former underboss Salvatore Merlino, who saw Stanfa as an outsider who had not worked his way up in the organization due to being imprisoned during the entire Scarfo era. While serving prison time together in 1990, Merlino met Ralph Natale. According to Natale, he and Merlino began plotting to take over the Philadelphia crime family during this period. Natale named Michael Ciancaglini, Stephen Mazzone, George Borgesi, Gaetano Tommy Horsehead Scafidi, and Martin Angelina as Merlino's key associates and co-conspirators in the plan. Stanfa was aware of the divide in his family and tried to find a peaceful solution. He named Michael's older brother Joseph Jr. as his new underboss. Stanfa hoped that this would appease the Merlino faction and bring them under his banner. However, tensions escalated, and in 1991 another war for control of the Philadelphia crime family was underway. Merlino loyalists shot and incapacitated Joseph Ciancaglini Jr., while Stanfa's faction killed Michael Ciancaglini. They continued attacking each other for months, including a freeway ambush Stanfa survived, and several failed attempts on Merlino's life. The Stanfa faction was still solidifying its control of the crime family and recruited many outside hitmen for the war. On March 17, 1994, Stanfa and 23 of his men were arrested on racketeering-related charges. This was the second major indictment on the crime family in 7 years. The federal case was the largest prosecution of an organized crime group in Philadelphia history. A key piece of evidence was 2 years of recorded conversations Stanfa would have with mobsters in his attorney's office and doctor's office. Believing attorney-client privilege and doctor-patient confidentiality would protect him, Stanfa openly talked about important mafia business with his men. However, the FBI was able to get a warrant to place covert listening devices in both offices once they figured out they were being used to aid criminal conspiracies. Stanfa, in an unusual tactic, recruited several men who were of only partial Italian heritage, including the Visi brothers. According to the former executive director of the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, Frederick Martins, Stanfa brought in people, like the Visi brothers, who had no background in the mob, but who were willing to break legs and pull a trigger. John Visi, who pleaded guilty to charges of racketeering and murder, entered the Witness Protection Program in 1994. William Visi, John Visi's brother, was murdered on October 5, 1995, the same day he was scheduled to testify against Stanfa at trial. John Stanfa was convicted in 1995 and sentenced to life imprisonment in 1996. With most of Stanfa's supporters also arrested and convicted, Merlino was released from prison in November 1994 and named Natale, who had also been released from prison on parole, as the new boss. Merlino positioned himself as Natale's underboss. During Natale's reign, Merlino was the real power in the family, allowing Natale to become boss to direct law enforcement attention away from himself. Merlino gained notoriety as a flamboyant celebrity gangster who often went out partying with a large entourage. The press dubbed him the John Gotti of Passyunk Avenue, a prominent street in South Philadelphia. This was due to his candid demeanor in front of news cameras. He also invited the press when he held Christmas parties for the homeless and gave away turkeys at Thanksgiving in housing projects. The arrogance and aggressiveness of Merlino's young faction turned off a lot of criminals from working with the crime family. Merlino would often make big bets with bookies and refuse to pay when he lost. This practice, known as guzzling, was used on both independent and mob-run bookies. During this time, Merlino and Natale oversaw the crime family's gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and stolen goods rackets. In 1995, Louis Torra, leader of the Philadelphia drug gang, the 10th and Oregon Crew, was severely beaten by Merlino's men, allegedly for failing to pay a mafia street tax on the gang's illegal earnings. Angered by the beating, Torra sought vengeance. His father, Anthony, hosted a meeting at his house during which Anthony, Louis, and his gang discussed killing Merlino. In January 1998, Louis Torra apparently hanged himself in a New York City jail while awaiting trial. In March 1998, Anthony Torra, on trial on charges of plotting to kill Merlino, was shot dead outside his home by a gunman in a black ski mask. Torra was shot twice as he left for the federal courthouse, where a jury was deliberating in the racketeering and drug case against him and 4 other men. "We consider this an organized crime assassination, a mob hit," Police Inspector Gerald Kane said. 3 years later, Merlino was put on trial for helping orchestrate the murder, but was acquitted. By the late 1990s, Merlino dodged more than 24 attempts on his life. Merlino was friends with Steve "Gorilla" Mondevergine, president of the Philadelphia chapter of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Merlino sometimes used the Pagans to help settle underworld disputes. The alliance between the Philadelphia Mafia and the Pagans prevented the Pagans' rivals, the Hells Angels, from expanding into pagan territory in southeast Pennsylvania and New Jersey. During the 1990s, Merlino was also aligned with members of the Junior Black Mafia. In June 1998, Natale was jailed for a parole violation. Merlino subsequently took control of the family and cut off support to the imprisoned boss. Angered by this, Natale offered to secretly record conversations with Merlino, but it was not until September 1999, when he was indicted for financing drug deals, that he formally struck a deal to cooperate. In doing so, Natale became the first sitting boss in the history of the American Mafia to become government informant. Between 1999 and 2001, Merlino, along with his underboss Stephen Mazzoni, his consigliere George Borghese, Martin Angelina, John Ciancaglini, and others, were arrested and put on trial for racketeering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, murder, and attempted murder. Natale testified against Merlino during his 2001 racketeering trial, but was unable to secure a conviction for the murders he claimed Merlino committed. On December 3, 2001, Merlino was, however, convicted of racketeering charges and given a 14-year prison sentence. Natale had admitted to committing 8 murders and 4 attempted murders. In 2005, Natale was sentenced to 13 years imprisonment for drug dealing, racketeering, and bribery. He was released in May 2011 and placed in witness protection. In 1997, Joseph Legambi was released from prison after he successfully appealed his murder conviction and was acquitted at retrial. After 10 years in prison, Legambi returned to a much different mafia family that saw 2 violent regime changes and the family under the control of a group of young mobsters. Legambi, who is Borgesi's uncle, was a Scarfo-era soldier when he was imprisoned in 1987 and was also mentored by Joey Merlino's father, Salvatore. After the arrest of Merlino, Borgesi and several others in 1999, Legambi was chosen to take over as acting boss of the family. In 2001, Merlino was sentenced to 14 years in prison. After Joseph Legambi took over, he remained in the shadows, rarely being mentioned in the media, while taking a much less trigger-happy approach to running the family. Legambi stabilized the family when he took over, maintained membership, and restored relations with the New York families. His inner circle included longtime Philadelphia mobsters Joseph Mausi Massimino, Gaetan Lucibello, and Anthony Staino. Merlino was released from prison on March 15, 2011, and served out his 3-year parole in Florida. In May 2011, Legambi and 14 other members and associates of the crime family were indicted by the FBI on racketeering charges related to illegal gambling operations, video poker gambling machines, and loan sharking. 7 of those indicted pleaded guilty to lesser charges. 1 became a government witness, and 7 went to trial in October 2012. In January 2014, 2 juries were hung on the racketeering charges, and Legambi and Borgesi were acquitted and released. Legambi was left to deal with the damage Merlino had done to the family's relationship with illegal bookmakers, who refused to do business with the Philadelphia crime family because Merlino used to make huge bets, then never paid when he lost. By the mid-2000s, the family consisted of approximately 50 members, half of whom were incarcerated, in addition to almost 100 associates. During Legambi's tenure, around a dozen made men were released from prison, filling the ranks. Many of these men had been young players who fell victim to the family's unstable history and are now middle-aged. He named Anthony Staino, his closest and most loyal associate, as his underboss. Under Legambi's direction, the family was able to muscle in on several video poker gambling machine businesses in the Philadelphia area. In 2007, 23 people, including 4 members of the Philadelphia crime family, were charged with running an illegal sports betting operation out of a poker room at the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City. The illegal operation was run by the Philadelphia crime family, who received much of the profits. The operation was accused of taking in $60 million in bets in a 20-month period. Most of those involved pleaded guilty and received sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. Following Merlino's release from prison in 2011, the FBI and organized crime reporters believed he continued to run the Philadelphia South Jersey mafia. Merlino disputed this, claiming he retired from a life of crime. As of 2015, Merlino divided his time between South Florida and Philadelphia. While the family's criminal operations have greatly reduced over the years, experts believe they have been able to quietly maintain power and stability, and the family remains one of the most active and powerful Italian-American mafia families. In 2016, it was reported that some members were involved in Philadelphia's booming construction and home rehab industry. In January 2018, Merlino went on trial for racketeering, fraud, and illegal gambling charges. After a trial ended in a hung jury, Merlino pleaded guilty to one illegal gambling charge and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. In April 2018, 4 soldiers and associates in New Jersey were arrested on drug trafficking charges. They are accused of distributing large amounts of methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, and marijuana. They eventually pleaded guilty and were given sentences between 5 and 15 years. On November 23, 2020, 15 members and associates of the crime family were indicted on federal racketeering charges. Among the defendants were reputed underboss Stephen Mazzoni and reputed capo Domenic Grande. The primary charges were illegal gambling, loan sharking, drug trafficking, and extorting other criminals, including illegal sports betting operators and loan sharks. Interest rates charged on outstanding gambling debts were as high as 264%. After previously pleading guilty, underboss Stephen Mazzone was sentenced to 5 years in prison on December 15, 2022. In 2024, Merlino was reportedly excommunicated or shelved by the Philadelphia family after embarking on a career as a podcast host and sports betting tipster, and replaced as head of the family by George Borgesi.
You're watching the Everything Network. Joe Legambi is an American mobster and former acting boss of the Philadelphia crime family. He is known among law enforcement circles to have a more old-school approach, in sharp contrast to boss Joey Merlino's flamboyant, high-profile style. Legambi was credited by the Philadelphia Police Department's Criminal Intelligence Unit with quietly bringing stability back to the troubled Philadelphia South Jersey branch of the American mafia during the 2000s. The New York mafia families have been pleased with him and his approach, as well as his ability to turn the Philadelphia crime family back into a stable group. He was born on August 9, 1939, in South Philadelphia, one of 4 children born to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a cab driver. He attended South Philadelphia High School before dropping out his junior year to join the United States Air Force, where he eventually earned his high school diploma. Legambi is also the uncle of Philadelphia mobster George Borges. Unlike many other gangsters who started their careers in crime as teenagers or young adults, Legambi didn't have a criminal record before age 32 when he was arrested for cigarette smuggling. In the 1970s, he started to associate himself with mobster brothers Yogi and Salvatore Chucky Merlino and worked as a bartender at a frequent mobster hangout. Legambi would become a protege of Merlino, who in turn was close to powerful crime family member Nicodemo Scarfo. During this time, Legambi started making money helping run illegal bookmaking operations for the Merlino crew. He earned a reputation as an expert in sports handicapping, particularly for football. By 1981, the Philadelphia crime family was being led by Scarfo, with Merlino serving as his underboss. In 1985, Nicky Scarfo ordered the murder of mafia associate Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso for refusing to pay tribute to him. When Philadelphia mobsters Thomas Del Giorno and Eugene Milano became government witnesses, they testified in court that on July 23rd, Legambi and Philip Narducci were the triggermen in the broad daylight hit, and Philip's brother Frank was the driver. Del Giorno, Milano, Merlino, and Fafi Iannarella helped plan the murder. Legambi became a made man in the Philadelphia crime family in 1986 at the age of 47 years old. In 1987, Legambi was arrested alongside Scarfo and others for the D'Alfonso murder. On April 5, 1989, Legambi, Chucky Merlino, Nicodemo Scarfo, Francis Iannarella, plus Frank and Phil Narducci were all convicted of the murder and were all given life sentences. In 1992, an appellate court panel overturned the murder convictions, citing prosecutorial misconduct and trial court error. At the retrial in 1997, Legambi and his fellow defendants were acquitted of the murder. At the time of Legambi's release in 1997, the family was being run by Ralph Natale and Joey Merlino, the son of Legambi's mentor Salvatore. While Legambi was in prison, Merlino led a crew of young mobsters who fought a war and took over the Philadelphia crime family. One of these young mobsters was George Borgesi, Legambi's nephew. After the arrest of Merlino, Borgesi and several others in 1999, Legambi was chosen to take over as acting boss of the family. In 2001, Merlino was sentenced to 14 years in prison. After he took over, he remained in the shadows, rarely being mentioned in the media, while taking a much less trigger-happy approach to running the family. Legambi had a no-show job with Top Job Carpeting, run by fellow Philadelphia crime family member Mauro Goffredo. On May 23, 2011, Legambi and 14 other members and associates of the crime family were indicted by the FBI on racketeering charges related to illegal gambling operations, video poker gambling machines, and loan sharking. In February 2013, Legambi was denied bail after the jury dismissed gambling and extortion charges. On January 28, 2014, 2 juries were hung on the racketeering charges, and Legambi and Borgesi were acquitted and released. In 2020 court documents, Legambi was identified as the consigliere of the Philadelphia crime family. George Cowboy Martorano was the longest-serving, first-time, non-violent offender in the Federal Bureau of Prisons at the time of his release. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole in 1984 on drug charges. He was released in October 2015 after serving over 30 years. In 1984, on the advice of his attorney Robert Simone, Martorano pleaded guilty to 19 counts of drug possession and distribution. Martorano was subsequently advised by both the prosecution and the judge, John Berner Hannum, that this plea could result in a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. The prosecution, however, had only recommended a sentence of from 40 to 54 months. On September 20, 1984, Martorano was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the longest prison term ever imposed on a first-time non-violent offender in American history. Martorano's father was reputed mobster Raymond Long John Martorano. Louis Pescini, a prosecutor with the United States Organized Crime Task Force, pressured George Martorano for information on the Philadelphia mafia. But he has always denied having any detailed knowledge of his father's business dealings. Judge Hannum's excessive sentence was a part of this pressure. Prior to his sentencing, his trial counsel, Robert Simone, was indicted on tax evasion charges. Again, before sentence was imposed in the Martorano case, Judge Hannum testified as a character witness for Simone. An article appeared in the Philadelphia Daily News criticizing the judge and called his testimony highly unusual. Martorano stated in subsequent appeals that Judge Hannum should have recused himself from his case prior to imposing sentence. Martorano distinguished himself during his time in federal prison. In addition to being a model prisoner, Martorano prevented the hijacking of an aircraft by prisoners while in transit from Philadelphia to Oklahoma, following the loss of his 33rd appeal. This incident has been documented by the FBI and Federal Bureau of Prisons and was called extraordinary. He was considered one of the most prolific writers in the federal prison system, having authored more than 31 books. He has also written numerous short stories, screenplays, and poems. He also published a self-help booklet for inmates entitled The Shot Caller. This publication has been approved by the FBOP for use in prisoner re-entry programs. He has developed a creative writing course called The Right to Life, which has assisted numerous inmates in earning GEDs and developing creative writing skills. Is a certified suicide watch counselor. He often uses himself as an example in this role, telling fellow inmates, "If I have hope facing what I am facing every day, So can you.
Robert Boston Bob Luisi Jr. was a former captain under Joey Merlino. Originally an associate of the Patriarca crime family, he joined the Philadelphia mob and became inducted in 1998. On November 6, 1995, his father, cousin, brother, and family friend were killed by gunman Anthony Clemente, who fired 13 shots inside of a Charlestown restaurant. It is noted that he attempted to seize control of the criminal rackets of Whitey Bulger in Boston during the 1990s and attempted to meet Kevin Weeks in 1998. He was indicted by the FBI on June 28, 1999, alongside 13 others for conspiracy to acquire and distribute cocaine. In 2000, he admitted to the murder of Anthony DiPrizio in 1997. He later became a pastor and relocated to Tennessee using the alias Alonso Esposito. Peter Pete the Crumb Caprio was a former captain. He admitted to conspiring to commit murder, extortion, and other crimes. During the case, he was accused of participating in the murder of William Gantz in 1994 and Joseph Sodano in 1996. Caprio testified against the absent Genovese crime family captain Lawrence Ritchie in October 2005, who was murdered a few weeks before his trial. Gaetano Tommy Horsehead Scafidi was a money runner for boss Nicky Scarfo, collecting and delivering money payments each week on behalf of Scarfo. His brother, Torrey Scafidi, was also a soldier in the Philly crime family and was inducted in 1986. He joined the Merlino faction during the Philadelphia mob war in the 1990s, who opposed new boss John Stanfa. However, he switched sides and was shortly after inducted into the crime family by Stanfa. In 1993, 2 gunmen attempted to kill him, however the bullet shattered his car mirror. He became an informer in 2000. Philadelphia Greek Mob, also known as the Philadelphia Greek Mafia, or simply the Greek Mafia, are a low-profile criminal organization of ethnic Greek Americans in Philadelphia, with alleged connections to the Italian Philadelphia crime family and the Greek Valenzas crime family of New York City. The Greek mob was formed in southern Greece by the original boss Steve Patakos. Patakos also had strong ties with the Karakostas and Ephthemiadis families of Macedonia in northern Greece. When the Karakostas family was run out of power in the 1960s, Patakos decided to move his operations to the U.S. When Patakos was sentenced to jail to serve life for murder, mobster Chelsea's Steve Bourras of Upper Northeast Philadelphia took over. Throughout the 1970s until 1981, Bourras headed the Greek mob in Philadelphia, participating in mostly loan sharking, extortion, methamphetamine trade, and illegal gambling. Bourras directed the mob efficiently, and he carried out business with more prominent families, such as the Philadelphia Mafia. He was a close associate of Italian wise guy and Scarfo soldier Raymond Martorano. On May 27, 1981, at the Venides Greek restaurant in South Philadelphia, Boris and his girlfriend, Jeanette Curro, were gunned down while dining with Ray Martorano and Philadelphia radio personality Jerry Blavat. Bourras was 50 years old and Jeanette Curro was 54. Though Bourras and Curro were killed, Martorano and Blavat were only wounded. It is reported that Nicodemo Scarfo of Philadelphia's notorious Philadelphia crime family ordered the hit, as Bourras had refused to pay Scarfo's street taxes, specifically for his meth ring. There have also been speculations that Martorano arranged the hit for Scarfo because of eyewitness claims that the gunman motioned for Martorano to move out of the way before opening fire. To this day, no one has ever been connected with the hit. The assassination took place just one day after the murder of another Greek mobster, Harry Boulos of Upper Darby. Curro's family also had ties to the mafia. The FBI had been investigating her nephew, Joe Crutch Curro, a made member of the Philadelphia Cosa Nostra, after they recorded him on a 1976 FBI wiretap at Frank's Cabana Steaks in South Philadelphia, at the time a base of operations for Philadelphia Mafia captain Frank Sindone. Sindone was described as the chief loan shark of Angelo Bruno, suggesting that he may have run a family bank or large-scale operation for Bruno. Sindone had previously served time for narcotics trafficking and was heavily involved in illegal gambling within the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Sindone also operated in concert with Philadelphia family associate Harry DeScenzo, who had ties to mobsters in Baltimore. Sindone was made into the Philadelphia family in the early 1970s, together with Joseph Ciancaglini. They were the last mob associates to be made into the family under Bruno. After Boras's assassination, the Greek mob did get involved with the mob war in Philadelphia in the 1980s, attempting to gain rackets in Atlantic City, but activity declined after the war. They were also involved in the high-profile prosecution of mafia lawyer Robert F. Simone in 1994. Simone was a close associate in the 1980s. A 2-year FBI investigation into a cocaine ring run by the Greek mafia in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. resulted in charges being filed in August of 1987. Although rather prominent in the 1970s and 1980s, the Greek mob has cooled down and remains rather dormant. However, there have been some occurrences of members being found loan sharking in Philadelphia in modern times. The reason for this dormant period could be traced back to the leader's loss in the 1980s mob war in Philadelphia, which was initiated after Martorano's assassination. Founded in the 1960s, the gang's name stems from a street corner that intersects 10th Street and Oregon Avenue in South Philadelphia. The 10th and Oregon crew conducts drug trafficking, gambling, extortion, and loan sharking rackets and operates from a series of taverns, bars, restaurants, and social clubs in South Philadelphia and South Jersey. Under different leadership, the group has both been allied closely with and violently feuded against the Philadelphia crime family at various times. In particular, the gang has established relations with the Philadelphia Mafia's Narducci crew. An early leader of the 10th and Oregon crew was Rocco Turra, a South Philadelphia career criminal and Teamsters enforcer. Rocco Turra was acquitted along with future Philadelphia crime family captain Joseph Ciancaglini of the August 1967 murder of Robert DeGeorge. In the early to late 1990s, the 10th and Oregon crew had multiple run-ins with a rival street gang, 12th and Wharton. 12th and Wharton had a very violent reputation, and both crews refused to back down from one another, which led to several violent attacks from both sides. In 1995, Luisi Turra, the leader of the 10th and Oregon crew, overseeing the gang's marijuana, cocaine, and heroin dealing and sports betting enterprise, was severely beaten and robbed of his Rolex watch at an after-hours club by associates of Philadelphia crime family boss Joey Merlino, allegedly for failing to pay a mafia street tax on the gang's illegal earnings. Angered by the beating, Turra sought vengeance. His father, Anthony Turra, hosted a meeting at his house during which Anthony, Luis, and the gang discussed killing Merlino. The plot failed to materialize as both Turras were indicted in August 1997, along with 13 others. In addition to drug charges, the gang was charged with the murder of one suspected informant and the attempted murder of another, and as well as conspiring to kill Merlino. While awaiting trial, Luisi Turra apparently hanged himself, though there is speculation that he was in fact murdered by the mafia, in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan on January 7, 1998. On March 18, 1998, Anthony Turra, terminally ill with cancer and reliant on a wheelchair, was shot to death outside his home by a gunman in a black ski mask as the elder Turra left for the federal courthouse, where a jury was deliberating in the racketeering and drug case against him and 4 other men. "We consider this an organized crime assassination, a mob hit," Police Inspector Gerald Kane said. Most of the others indicted were convicted of racketeering. 3 years later, Merlino was put on trial for helping orchestrate Anthony Turra's murder, but was acquitted. A dispute between the 10th and Oregon crew and the Pagans Motorcycle Club over drug dealing and loan sharking turf began in the late 1990s. On February 28, 1999, Pagan's bikers beat down 5 10th Street crew members at a bar owned by Eugene "Genie Boy" Miller, who had taken over the remnants of the organization after Louis Tura's death. Miller was beaten, pistol-whipped, and shot in the leg and buttocks. Joey Merlino attempted to broker a peace treaty between the two warring gangs and hosted a sit-down in the spring of 1999, which Pagan's president Steve "Gorilla" Mondevergine and leading 10th and O gang member John "Johnny the Hat" Hendry both attended. However, no agreement was reached, and on August 29, 1999, Mondevergine survived being shot 8 times at close range as he walked to his mother's house after leaving a bar. He refused to identify his attacker to police. On November 3, 2000, Mondevergine opened fire on Hendry as he left a diner, firing twice and missing both times. Mondevergine was arrested near the scene of the shooting in possession of a firearm later that day by police and FBI agents conducting surveillance in the area. He was imprisoned for racketeering in January 2001 and served a 3-year sentence. 10th and Oregon crew member Nicodemo "Nicky Slick" DiPietro was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in connection with the February 28, 2000 shooting death of Tad Rice Green. Following the conflicts with the Philadelphia Mafia and the Pagans, the 10th and Oregon crew leaders temporarily relocated to nearby Deptford Township in New Jersey, before later returning to South Philadelphia. In June 2002, 3 Philadelphia crime family associates were reportedly beaten and knocked unconscious by 10th and Oregon crew members after a verbal disagreement at a club on Delaware Avenue in Penn's Landing. Andrew McCauley, a former member of the 10th and O crew who had left the gang following a dispute with leaders Johnny Garbarino and Eugene "Genie Boy" Miller, was sentenced to 5 years in state prison on February 27, 2009, for his role in running a sports bookmaking network with the Philadelphia crime family that operated inside the Borgata Hotel Casino poker room in Atlantic City. The gambling ring was dismantled in November 2007 following Operation High Roller, an investigation led by the state police and the Division of Criminal Justice, which involved the assistance of 11 other law enforcement agencies in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The gang continues to have a significant presence in South Philadelphia, and to a lesser extent certain Italian-American neighborhoods in South Jersey, but it has increasingly operated as a part of the Italian-American Philadelphia Mafia in recent years.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
The Northeast Philly Irish Mob is a predominantly Irish-American criminal network based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The K&A gang was started following World War II and controlled the city's Irish-American criminal underworld for much of the late 20th century. The group was mainly a burglary ring for much of its early history, but shifted into loan sharking, illegal gambling, racketeering, and ultimately drug trafficking in its later existence. The name K&A is derived from Kensington and Allegheny, the road intersection where the gang originally formed. Domestically, the network was known to have ties to various criminal organizations in its surrounding area. They were known to have amicable ties to the mafia, namely the Scarfo crime family, but also the South Jersey faction of the New York City-based Genovese crime family, the local Greek mob, local Jewish American gangsters, and various independent drug and hijacking gangs of various European ethnicities in the greater Philadelphia area. They were also said to have ties to the Irish Republican Army and the larger Irish Republican movement. From the post-war 1950s to the 1970s, members of the network were tied to burglaries and theft operations all along the East Coast. While most of their work was around the Philadelphia area, they ventured out from their turf since the group's inception. A favored target was the wealthy residential Jewish suburbs, which would be the livelihood of the group for many years. The crew was adamant about not carrying weapons with them while they burglarized. This was largely due to the liability of increased jail time if caught with a firearm. They also traded the cliché burglary attire for professional suits while on the job in case they were stopped. In those days, there was no overarching structure within the gang. It was horizontal in nature, there being several prominent crew chiefs who held influence. Their reach even extended outside the boundaries of Philadelphia, as they targeted other ventures. In North Carolina, several members were known as the Hallmark Gang and would collaborate with the Dixie Mafia. They are also allegedly responsible for the Pottsville heist in 1959. George Holmes alleges that a showgirl named Lillian Reyes and Vicky Mason, aka Viola Lorenzo, gave the gang the tip they needed to pilfer $478,000 in cash and jewelry from the home of John B. Rich. Lillian Tiger Lil Rice and her good friend Vicky were well-known nightclub entrepreneurs and former showgirls who had ties to the gangsters. By the late 1970s, with the advent of modern home security technologies, the burglary racket was no longer viable as a main source of income. With the rise of the drug culture of the 1980s, the group began to focus less on their signature brand of thievery and more towards traditional criminal schemes and the booming methamphetamine trade. This was largely due to the immense profit that was available due to the high demand in the area. By the early 1980s, Frank the Beard Zappacosta and John Carlisle Berkery had close ties with Angelo Bruno and Raymond Martorano of the Philadelphia crime family, as well as John McCullough, union boss of the Roofers Union, Local 30. It was through these influential connections that the K&A gang would expand into other rackets, establishing its foothold in the Northeast. In 1983, Philadelphia garnered a reputation as the meth capital of the world, according to a statement published by the Associated Press from a local police officer. It is widely held that this was made possible due to the K&A gang and the Junior Black Mafia, among others. After being indicted for 14 counts of trafficking in methamphetamine and the chemical P2P in January 1982, Berkery fled to Ireland to avoid prosecution, where he supposedly had contacts in the Irish Republican Army. After spending 5 years on the run, he was captured in June 1987 and subsequently faced trial in the fall of 1987. Berkery admitted to engaging in a large-scale meth deal with Chelseas Boras, leader of the Philadelphia Greek mob. Ronald Raiton, a notable criminal figure in the methamphetamine trade, testified that Berkery had bought 200 gallons of P2P from Raiton over the course of a year in 1980 to 1981. Prosecutors stated that Berkery, Frank the Beard Zappacosta, and Raymond Martorano had planned to take over all meth trafficking in Philadelphia. Jackson and Zappacosta assumed control of the group. Jackson and Zappacosta went on to lead the group until their convictions in late 1987, just a week after their former boss faced trial and was also found guilty. Jackson was said to have gained around $4 million in drug profits in the period between his takeover of the gang's meth endeavors and his eventual arrest. He and Frank, the Beard Zappacosta, received a lifetime sentence in accordance with the Continuing Criminal Enterprise Statute, otherwise known as the Drug Kingpin Law. Along with Carl Jackson and Frank the Beard Zappacosta, 22 affiliates of the K&A meth ring were indicted under federal drug manufacturing charges related to an operation that authorities believe produced roughly $10 million worth of speed in hidden labs across the Pennsylvania area. They were said to have manufactured 100 pounds of methamphetamine at a time, which was then distributed by Jackson's subordinates. At the time, U.S. Attorney Edward Dennis claimed in a press release that the gang was one of the largest methamphetamine organizations in the nation. Edward Loney was to arrange the procurement of 50 gallons of P2P, a precursor chemical, along with Waldemar Walter Roeder from Toronto, while Jackson sold mass quantities to contacts in New York. After the downfall of Carl Jackson and Roy Stalker, Frank the Beard Zappacosta became the dominant K&A member operating a methamphetamine manufacturing enterprise. In 1981, Stacker sought a partnership with Scarfo in a methamphetamine operation in northeast Philadelphia through Albert Reds Pontani. Between 1981 and 1986, he allegedly produced and distributed methamphetamine, commonly known as speed, and also allegedly took part in extortion, loan sharking, and burglary. The meth rings were sanctioned by the Scarfo crime family, who received a cut of the profits. In February 1991, Roy Stalker and 3 others were found guilty of operating a ring that sold $52 million worth of methamphetamine between 1981 and 1987. In the early 2000s, the Traits brothers, who were connected to the K&A gang through the Roofers Union, Local 30, were indicted for the murder of Robert Hammond. He was allegedly assumed to be an informant on the meth operation that the Traits brother ran in tandem with members of the K&A gang.